All right. Cool. Okay, so that's good for Grandpa, unless you had any other stories that. Well, I guess we'll probably get into them later with the decades. It's kind of, I have this written out kind of odd, but that's okay. We'll get to it. So your dad was born in Iowa, and how, we don't know. Let's see here. Did your dad ever talk about living in Kansas City and what that was like, his upbringing?
No, not really. I just some kind of little stories about him. He liked to sing. I think he would have liked to have had training as a singer. He also liked working in the yard. He, at least when he was older, when I knew him, when he was a grandfather, really. But he liked to work in the yard, and I think he would have liked to have had training there. But his family thought that wasn't snooty enough or fancy enough. So anyway, they sent him to MIT, and he got an engineering degree, and then he came back to Kansas City, and I don't know if he worked as an engineer or not, but I think then he went to work in a law office and got a law degree. In those days, you didn't have to go to college to get a law degree, or I guess maybe there were several ways to get a law degree, but he worked at a law office and got past the bar that way. So then he worked as a lawyer, and then he also worked for my dad for his dad in the bank. It was a family bank, so he kind of had fun.
What was the name of the bank?
Lombard and Son.
Lombard and Son. Okay. Huh. Did he meet your mom at MIT or?
No, they actually met in. My mother was born in St. Louis, and they met at a party. I think that they'd both finished school by the time they met. I don't know exactly. But anyway, they were at a party, and this is the story, and I don't know how true it is because my dad often would embellish things. But he said that he fell down a flight of stairs, and there were glass doors at the bottom of the stairs. He fell through the glass doors, breaking them. Wow. And my mother was standing there, and that was how they met. So, but as I say, I don't know how much truth to give to any of the stories he would. Because he would take us on trips, and we'd see a crevice in a rock or something, and the ocean would come through, and he'd go on and on about this story, how historical it was, and who came there, and why it was, and I mean, it was all
made up.
All made up. So I don't know how.
Maybe that's the creative side. Maybe
yeah.
That's where I got that.
Yeah.
And what was your mom like when she was younger? Do you know? I mean, did she talk about? Or did you hear just?
No. She had two sisters. One of whom, let's say, two sisters. The older one was Mabel. Then she was her name was Ellen, but she was called Nellie. And then she had a younger sister, Lucy. And Lucy, I think, died. I don't know what age, but I think fairly young. And then their mother died when my mother was, I'm not sure, around 10 or something. And so Mabel was 12. Now, I think I have these facts correct. I don't know. Yeah. They're sort of all jumbled together. But anyway, so the story goes that when her sister Mabel, it would be my Aunt Mabel, was 12, she had to take over. Her father was a judge and a pretty important man in St. Louis, and they had a lot of parties and stuff, and she had to take over being the hostess at these parties at the age of 12.
Wow.
So, and I don't know how involved my mother was in any of this, she being 10.
Right.
But anyway, that's the story about that.
So was your mom, did she have a similar hosting ability like Mabel?
Well, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. You mean as a youngster?
Well, just as... I mean, did she throw parties when she was older?
Yeah, we used to have dinner parties at our house and stuff. Yeah, they like that. They like the social life.
That's fun. And she died when you were 10.
Yeah.
Right. What was that? What did she die of? She
had a stroke, and One interesting thing that I remember, I was 10 and I was the youngest of 5 children, and my Aunt Mabel, the same woman, was there because I guess my mother had been sick for a while. My mother off and on was sick throughout my childhood, not really badly sick. I mean, I could, but anyway, Aunt Mabel was there, and so she was sleeping in my room, and I was then sharing a room with my other 2 sisters, a larger room. And I remember, I don't know who it was, came in, Aunt Mabel or my dad or whoever, and told us that Mother had died. And I remember it sort of hit me kind of, but I didn't, and my 2 sisters burst into tears, and I didn't, there weren't any tears, and I felt bad because I thought, what's the matter with me that I'm not crying and my sisters are crying? I remember that. It was sort of an interesting reaction to.
I guess you're so young though that you probably don't grasp the.
Probably, yeah, right.
Wow. So it was definitely, even though you said she was ill, it was still a sudden thing. I mean.
Yeah.
It wasn't like she had been diagnosed with something and knew that she would be dying that soon.
Pardon?
It wasn't like she was diagnosed with something and.
No, she had a stroke. She definitely died of a stroke. Yeah.
Wow. And
I remember the whole half of her face. I guess her whole body was paralyzed for a while before she died. We go in and see her, and I remember, that was strange to see that happening with your mother,
especially at that age.
Yeah.
Were you close to her?
I don't know if I would say I was close to her. I don't have any real memories of being that close to her. I know there are pictures that I have of me being with a nurse, and I don't know how long this nurse, when I was like, maybe 6 months to a year or something. I'm not sure the age, but anyway, so I'm just looking back and thinking, I must have had a nurse that took care of me more than my mother did.
Huh.
So I don't know whether it was that my mother wasn't well or what the story was. I don't know. All that's a little hazy.
So after she passed away, I mean, I'm sure the family was upset, but was that one of the reasons why you moved back?
Well, actually, what happened was that was right at the. I was 10. I was born in 1920, so. I was actually, I'm trying to think how the time goes, but anyway, the Depression of 29 had come, and my father his job was being vice president of the Stable Money Association, so naturally that company went under with the Depression, along with a lot of other banking things, and so that was pretty traumatic for our family to have that happen, and his whole livelihood was gone, and then my mother died. So, the household was just sort of, I don't know, just strange, big, big things that happened. So I just remember that I told my dad that I thought I'd like to go out to California and visit grandmother. And I wasn't really close to grandmother. We did see her once in a while, and every Christmas she'd send us $5 gold pieces for Christmas, I remember, and that was always fun. But I just thought, I guess I thought it'd be sort of fun to get a change. So I guess Dad must have called up grandmother and said, would it be okay if Jack and I, Jack was my brother who was 2 years older, go out there for a visit.
Okay.
So that was a big deal, that trip. The 2 of us went on this trip across country, which took 5 days on the train.
So he was 12?
He was 12.
He was 12 and you were 10?
And I was 10, yeah. So my Aunt Mabel still lived in St. Louis, and so she met us at the train and we had to change trains in St. Louis, and she helped us change trains. I remember that. And I remember my dad gave us a box of chocolate candy when we left in New York, because we were living in New York at that time.
Okay.
Scarsdale, New York. We left New York City. Anyway, he gave us a box of candy. He said, now you can have 1 piece after each meal. So, and we actually followed that rule. Wow. So it was a big deal which piece of candy we were going to have after each meal. Was kind of interesting.
Well-disciplined kids.
Yeah, well, that was a funny thing. And we had one of us had a bunk bed, one of us had a lower bed. And I think we actually traded off every night because it was the most fun to be in the lower bunk where you could see out when you were stopped at the stations. And I remember that whoever was in the top bunk would climb down to the lower bunk. I mean, we must have been pretty disturbing to all the other other passengers on the train.
But you said it was, so you were going out more as a visit to kind of get away, but did you...
That was the thought. I think that was the thought in everybody's mind. But I think maybe it worked out that through conversations between my dad and his mother, my grandmother, that well, why don't we have them stay, go to school here, and because Dad wasn't, you know, I guess he kept thinking he'd get back on his feet or get a job or something would happen, and that never really happened. So I'm thinking it must have worked that way. I don't know whether they had in their mind, okay, why don't you just bring up these two kids? You know, I don't think that was the thought when we went there.
Why was it? Why did he choose Norman? Were you just closer with?
No, Jack.
Or Jack, sorry. I mean, Jack wasn't the oldest, right? I could
no,
see the oldest child and the youngest child.
No, the oldest child, Norman, which I think you have met. You met him. Was he out of the family at that time? Because he ran away when he was about 15, and joined the circus.
Wow. That's a good story.
No, wait a minute. Did he join the circus then? He ran away. Gosh, I wish I had more recollection of all these details. But anyway, he ran away, and I think he did join the circus for a while. Not as a performer, but as a helper, I guess. I don't know.
Wow.
So he wasn't around, and
so he stayed with. Did he? Do you know if he stayed?
He was. If he what?
If he stayed with the circus, I mean. Was that a job that sort of evolved into something, or? All
I remember is that after we had been at my grandmother's for a few years, I remember one time particularly he came and stayed with us when the circus came to town. It was the Barnum and Bailey Circus. And why he joined the circus, I don't know. What connection he had or what desire or what the deal was. I do know that he went to school in Florida, to Rollins College in Florida. College, this was.
Okay.
This was, no, wait a minute, this had to be after he was 15. I'm not, you know, I'm not really dead sure of all these facts or when they all fit in. But I do know that he did run away from home when he was 15. Maybe he came back and maybe he was rescued or I don't know. I don't know all that. So maybe you should forget all that.
No, that's...
But he was sort of in and out. You know, I can remember all through those times. And anyway, at college, this was sort of an interesting story. I believe he was a freshman, and he and a bunch of other kids, I don't know whether they'd been drinking or what, but evidently they got an old car and drove the car down the middle aisle of the college chapel. And I think it was like Sunday morning when there was a service there. Now he was expelled from college for that. So he never did finish college. He was sort of a rebel, I think. I'm sure he was a rebel. But anyway,
I've never heard any.
You hadn't heard that?
I've never heard though. I've never got that impression or anything. Were your siblings? I mean, you and your siblings close? Or it sounds like maybe he was a wild streak. Or
I think he did have a wild streak. As I say, he was a rebel and he actually was pretty smart. As I remember, he would research subjects that he was interested in, go to the library. This is later on in his life. And so he was always interested in keeping his mind active and all. And actually, he and Dad had a lot of squabbles, as I was told. See, this was like after I was in Pasadena. And but he and Dad also lived together in New York after this. Because after we left, I guess after it was decided that we were going to stay, and then my older sister Betty, who was, Norman was 10 years older than I. Betty was 5 years older than I, so she had to be 15 at the time our mother died. And I don't know if it was right then, but soon after anyway, she was either 15 or 16. She got a job working at Macy's in New York City. And this was all a big blow because up until that time, we'd been a pretty, I would say, upper middle class family, had a nice home and no problems, and all that. So anyway, she got a job living in New York, working in New York City, and lived there in an apartment. Then my younger sister, Betty, who wasn't Ellen, that was 3 years older than I'm still the youngest. But anyway, I'm getting a little confused here. Okay, I know she lived in a boarding house. Now, I guess my dad must have lived with her in that boarding house. I remember it was down at the, we lived on a street called Fairview Road, and it was a long road, and the road down, this boarding house was down near town, down near the main part of the town of Scarsdale. And she was going to Scarsdale High. No, she wouldn't have been in high school then. But anyway, she was going to school there. But I remember she came out to live with grandmother the year after we did.
Oh, okay.
Because I guess it was a pretty lonely, horrible life for her. Her mother had just died, and the family's all split up, and her dad was in New York trying to work, and I think it was a huge blow to my dad to have all this happen all at once. Did
he talk to you about it, or you just gathered that?
I just gathered that. No, he didn't.
Was he a pretty private man, or was that just that during that time parents don't?
Well, I don't know whether at 10 years old they would give you all their ins and outs, and I think at that time parents didn't know. I wouldn't say. I always felt very close to him. I always liked him a lot, but I did also decide through all this, and I don't know at what stage I decided this, was that if I ever have a family, if something happened like this, I think the most important thing is to keep the family together and not, I think he thought he was doing the best for us, that we would be raised by my grandmother. She had money and she could send us to school and do all the things. So anyway, I think that was his thinking. But
but there is definitely almost a feeling of it.
So anyway, Norman and Dad tried living together in an apartment in New York for a while, but I think that didn't work. They always were pretty much at odds, and I think this is a lot of the problem why Norman maybe was a rebel and why he ran away. I don't know the whole story about all that. I don't know.
That's interesting. Now, who was the Christian Science? Was that your grandma?
That was my grandmother, yeah.
Okay. Do you know how she got involved with that, or? She was into it pretty.
She actually, I don't know if she. I don't know if she wasn't really a friend of Mary Baker Eddy's, I don't think, who started the Christian Science movement in Boston. But I think she knew her, and I'm not sure exactly why she came. We probably have all this on some. I've got a whole bunch of files and papers on my family. A lot of this may be and all that. I should have read up on all this.
No, that's okay. That'd be interesting to look at later anyway.
Yeah, but anyway, I don't know whether it was through somebody being sick and being cured. I don't know why she got into it, to tell you the honest truth. But she was the one, and actually, so I think my dad was raised as a Christian Scientist from a certain point in his life. So I think that my mother and my dad were Christian Scientists for a while in our family. Okay. When they had kids. Wait a minute, no, I take that back. I think it was up until, I think she had a hard delivery with Norman. And just about died, or at least had a very hard delivery. So my dad, I think, decided that, because they were trying to rely on Christian Science to help her, they decided, that's the end of that. Yeah. So we were not raised as Christian Scientists, but they were Christian Scientists up until that point. So anyway, that was the story about that. And then when Jack and I went out to California to live with her, we went to Christian Science Sunday school, and we're kind of raised as Christian Scientists with her.
And why did you take any of that with you when you started your family, or
mentally? Well,
did you think?
I think philosophically, I think there's a lot to it. I think a lot of the belief is that that we all have God within us. It's not like some supernatural person. I don't know whether, I think a lot of my personal feeling about doctors and all maybe could be colored by that. I'm sure it probably was, but I guess I believe that inherently we all are healthy, and that if we get ourselves back to being healthy, then we will stay well.
Right.
I believe that in plants and animals,
Yeah.
and, so I don't know, and I guess a lot of that's from Christian Science.
But just out of curiosity, like with Mom, Carol, and Norm, I mean, were they not raised as Christian Science because Fati wasn't into it, or?
I think that was the main thing, that Fati wasn't into it, and I think I was sort of slowly getting away. I know in college they had like a Christian Science Society at Stanford where I was, and a lot of colleges they have that. And I think I went a time or two, but I just couldn't get totally into it. So, and I know when I was thinking about getting Norman to go to Sunday school, I looked around at the different churches and what they had to offer. I'd go with him. We'd go to the Sunday school class when he was 4, say, and I'd sit in the class and hear what they were doing. And I actually liked the Christian Science Sunday school, just the way it was handled. It was very, just very low key, but Fati didn't want to have him raised as a Christian Scientist, so I didn't, fight it too much.
Right. Huh. So you moved out to Piedmont. That's where your grandmother was living.
No, she was living in Pasadena.
Oh, she was it went Pasadena first.
No, the Piedmont comes.
Yeah.
The Piedmont comes into it that somewhere along the line in the banking world, maybe my dad was, or my grandfather was ready to retire, and they sold the bank and moved out to Piedmont and built this beautiful home in Piedmont, which is still there, which I love dearly. But I never lived in it. I never knew my grandfather. He died before I was born. He died in 1918. I was born in 1920. They actually built that house in 1915, and then he died in 1918. So it's a shame that he only lived in it for a very short time.
And that was a Julia Morgan.
Yeah.
Yeah. I remember you said that.
It's a beautiful house, and fortunately the people that own it now love it and are taking care of it and keeping it in the way that it was. And I haven't seen it in a few years, but last time I saw it, they really were doing a nice job with it.
Did you get to stay there or visit when you were younger?
No, because he died in 1918, and my grandmother sold the house, and I was born in 1920. So
she sold it right away. She didn't stay there.
She didn't. I don't know exactly the time, but I have a feeling it was pretty soon after. It was a big house, and she had all of her kids were grown and gone, and she had no reason to live in a big house. I guess this was the thinking. And her Uncle Albert, who was my father's brother, was living in Pasadena, and he was an architect. That was part of his job. But anyway, so I guess she went down there. He built her a house in Pasadena, and she went down there to live. So that's where we went, because this was 1930. So that was, she'd been down in Pasadena 10 years or more.
And what was the Pasadena house like?
It's still there. It's a nice house. It wasn't any big mansion. It was like a normal 3-bedroom house, 2-story house. Very nice house.
Yeah. Huh.
It's on the corner of La Loma and Arroyo Boulevard, right across the street from the Arroyo, which, and this was, of course, before they ever had freeways and all, and we used to go across the street when there was a trickle of a river, even in the summertime, and the freeway doesn't run right by the house.
Okay.
But it was basically supposed to run down this Arroyo Seco. But anyway, that's that.
So, talk about the Depression. I mean, were you affected where you couldn't spend? I mean, obviously you moved out.
Yeah, I think I was affected by that. It split up our family.
But was your grandmother?
It's hard to say, if there hadn't been a depression, and if it just the fact that my mother had died, I don't know what would have happened. Chances are we would have stayed all together. I think the depression is what ultimately got to my dad. He thought, I have these kids, and what can I do?
Yeah, right. And was your grandmother? I mean, she probably had a fair amount of money from your grandfather.
Yeah, she never had any money problems. No.
She wasn't strict, and all these stories you read about, and all the textbooks about going without bread.
Yeah, I know. No, that was the reason, I think, that we were sent out there, so that we wouldn't be affected. So that we could live what he thought would be a better life.
Yeah. What were you like as a kid? I remember you had said that you had an interest in music and an interest in theater and.
Well, my interest in theater was just, I would say it wasn't huge, but I liked being in plays, and I remember being in plays from kindergarten. I'm not kindergarten, junior high. I'm thinking, wow.
Okay.
And as far as music, I didn't really take to singing. I used to sing in the glee club and stuff, but no big deal. But I do remember, one time when I was in a play in junior high, it was funny. I don't know what part I was playing or anything, but I had to lean over and do something, and I remember I passed out. I don't know why I did. I just passed out. I think it was in a rehearsal, fortunately. So that was kind of an interesting thing to happen. And then another play I was in, I took the part of a person named Laurie, and I don't know what that play was. And I liked the name Laurie, and my name was Barbara, of course. Mm-hmm. And I don't know whether all kids are like this, but a lot of kids, I think, that age don't like their name as part of their esteem or whatever. So anyway, the kids started calling me Laurie, and I liked that, and so I kind of took on the name of Laurie for a while.
That was in junior high, or that was in high school?
That was in junior high, yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that you had the Laurie name for that long.
Yeah,
that's interesting.
yeah.
So when Fatih met you, did he meet you as Laurie? I mean, obviously he knew.
I think he did. Yeah, I think my official name always was Barbara.
Right.
So anyway, yeah.
So Katie and I were just talking about this. What about, because some of the most interesting things is like nowadays, like just the day-to-day things, like we check email and we watch TV just as like part of your normal routine. What do you do?
What was
you do like
my day's life?
Dinner? Or as a kid, did you read? Did you?
Wow, that's interesting. I don't know. I think we did do a lot of reading, and just sort of like, I don't know. That's an interesting question. Hi. We did read. I think we played games. I know Grandma had a piano, so we took piano lessons. She wanted us all to play the piano, mm-hmm. and we had to practice the piano every day. And another thing about the piano, Grandmother would pay us $1 to learn a hymn, in the Christian Science hymnal. So we all would pick out the easiest ones. Some are quite easy and some are more complicated. After a while, she got tired of that because as I said, Ellen came out the year after we did, and then Betty came out the year after that. So there was a time. Betty got married during that first year she was out. I believe it was during the first year, maybe towards the end. But anyway, there was a time when there were 4 teenagers, in the house, all learning these hymns and learning the easiest ones first, until I guess it was driving her crazy to hear the same hymns. So after a while, we had to put our name on one that we were learning, and no one else could learn that same hymn. And after a while, too, it got to be too many dollars were going out, so she kept lowering the price till it was down to 25 cents after a while. But you asked what we did. I think we probably played games, and I remember roller skating a lot in the neighborhood. We didn't have bicycles, but and then this same Uncle Albert, who lived in Pasadena, family lived in Pasadena, and that's where Margaret's family was. Have you ever met my cousin Margaret, who now lives in Newport Beach? She's been at a couple of Christmas things, but anyway, she was a year and a half younger than I, so we got together with her, And they had a tennis court, so we'd play tennis on their tennis court, and I don't know, different things like that.
What about in chores? Did you have any? Did you have to do laundry or?
You know, it's funny. I don't think we had any specific chores. I don't remember even any hassle about keeping our rooms clean, but I don't remember having messy rooms. But and whether it was a big deal, I don't know.
Okay.
Oh, one thing we had to do, and this happened every Saturday, we had to read the lesson. With the in the Christian Science, they have, rather than a sermon, they have a lesson, passages from the Bible and from the Science and Health, which is the textbook there and all this. But anyway, we'd have to read this with grandmother. And that was, one of us would, particularly Jack and I remember, one of us would read the Science and Health, and one of us would read the Bible, and we'd trade off, and so that was a every week we had to do that.
Yeah, and you didn't get $1 for it. Do you want me to turn it off here? Were you looking to walk by?
You can walk by, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, or you can walk by, or you can stand there, whatever Mootsy prefers.
Okay, I'll get out of your way.
Let's see here. And you went to high school in Pasadena?
You asked about pastime. One thing we did, we listened to radio.
Oh, okay, yeah. Actually,
A
I
lot.
was going to ask you about that.
But I think we spent a good amount of time with Margaret. You know, not a good amount of time, but like every Sunday, we'd have Sunday dinner with Aunt Marie and Uncle Albert and Margaret. And almost every Sunday we had leg of lamb, which I still adore.
Oh, wow. Katie loves them. So radio, like, I mean, just the
hit
sketch
parade
comedies,
and hit parade, yeah, and comedies. You know, Jack Benny and
right.
Amos and Andy and all those
Do you
things.
remember or have any memory of the fireside chats that we read about?
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
Was that, now you said that your grandparents were Republican, right?
Yeah.
Was there any, were they?
My grandmother, my grandfather, you know, wasn't around. Just
right,
my
your
grandmother. Yeah.
Did she talk about politics very much, or?
No, not that I recall.
But do you remember?
I think she did like Franklin Roosevelt, though.
Okay.
Like, she liked the look in his eye.
Mm. Huh.
That's what I remember about that.
And did you ever sit around and listen to the fireside chats, or that probably wouldn't be very interesting to a 10-year-old?
Well, of course, I was getting older, you know.
Right.
I didn't stay 10 forever.
Yeah,
But no, I remember listening to him. Yeah.
Okay.
Whether, I don't know if we were required to, or whether it was just, I think it was a big deal, you know, to hear him.
Yeah.
And
Straight from president's mouth.
yeah.
Talking to you. And what was high school like?
Well, now where I went to school in Pasadena, and I don't know if they still have it. They had the 6-4-4-2 plan, which was first 6th grades up to the 6th grade. Then the next 4 was 7th, 8th, 9th, and 10th.
Okay.
And the next 4 was 11th, 12th, and the first 2 years of college. So that's the way it went. So I never really had a high school. So it was junior high
Right.
from 7th, 8th, 9th, and 10th. And then, as I say, at 11th grade, then we went to junior college, Pasadena JC.
Wow.
And we graduated, when you graduated from high school, it was called Lower Division Junior College.
Oh, that's interesting.
So, it was sort of, it was different than anyone else.
You're going to go to college.
Yeah, I guess in junior high we had a lot of things. I remember I worked on the paper. I loved working on the school paper, and I was at the final, when I ended, like I guess the last year, my 10th year in school, I was editor of the paper, and that was fun. I loved doing that.
Yeah.
And then when I went to JC, I also worked on the paper, but I never as much as I did in junior high.
What attracted you to journalism? Was it just?
I don't know. I liked writing.
Mm-hmm.
I always thought I was going to be a newspaper person.
Yeah.
And I remember one of the big deals of working on the newspaper in junior college was that every year the journalism crew would put out the Pasadena Star News, which was the paper.
Oh, okay.
So it was an all-night affair, and
Yeah.
that was so much fun. I loved that.
Yeah.
I did that, I think, only twice. Because, see, I graduated from high school after the first 2 years
Right.
there. And then, I don't know if you remember this, but I wanted to go to Stanford.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was admitted to Stanford, so I thought I was going to go, after I finished what would be like high school. And I was 16, and which wasn't unusual, I don't think. I didn't feel young. I think there were a lot of kids that were that age.
Right.
Now I think you're 18, you graduate from high school, but
Right.
then I think you were 16. I don't know. But anyway, maybe I was, because my birthday was at the end of the year, I don't know how that worked. But anyway, so I got myself admitted to Stanford. And of course, my grandmother didn't like the idea at all, but she was being a Christian Scientist, and there's a school, Principia College in Illinois, which is a college for Christian Scientists.
Right.
Actually, Jack went there for part of his high school. They also had a high school, and Ellen went there for college. Betty had gotten married, so she didn't go to college. But grandmother wanted me to go to Principia, but it wasn't a rebellious thing.
Right.
I just was all excited about Stanford for all the stupid reasons.
Yeah, what were those reasons again?
Because I had read a book called The Diary of a Line Smasher. It was about a football star at Stanford, and I don't remember whether that got me interested in football. My brother Jack also played football, and I was a big football fan.
Right.
Huge football fan. In fact, in junior high, I got a group of us together, girls, and we pretended that we were the Stanford football team, the Wow Boys, or the Vow Boys, whichever they were. The Monk Mostrip, Bones Hamilton, Bobby Grayson. I don't know if you know any of those names. Those were big stars then.
Okay.
Actually, they won the Rose Bowl game and all that stuff. Anyway, I was Monk Mostrip, and we used to write poems to these guys, and I mean, it was awful. And one time we got football uniforms from, I guess, the school team, and we rehearsed. We made up a dance. And I don't know who choreographed it. I'm afraid maybe I did. It wasn't all that great. But anyway, we did this routine. We did a football dance on stage for the school. We were in our football outfits, and we'd pass the ball around. I mean, it was hysterical. It really was.
Yeah.
But anyway, that was the reason I wanted to go to Stanford. I really didn't know anything about its great academics status or anything. And part of it probably was rebellion. I just didn't want to go to Principia.
Right.
But anyway, I was all set to go. Then 2 weeks before school started, my grandmother decided that I was too young to go up there. I think maybe she had gone up on the bus or whatever and checked the school out. I'm not even sure how that was. But anyway, she decided I was too young. So I had to cancel that. And stupidly, I thought I think what I did was just write them a letter and say that I wasn't going to be coming this year, but I would come next year. So I thought that was all set. That was all I needed to do to go next year. So as the next year came around and summer came upon us, and I didn't hear from them, and I started getting a little nervous. And understand, grandmother wasn't any part of this. She wasn't promoting this or helping me, or anyway, it wasn't that it wasn't that she was trying to not be part of it. She just wasn't into it. This was my deal.
Yeah.
So anyway, so all of a sudden I started thinking, hey, wait a minute, what's the deal here? So I guess I wrote.
I'll check that this is on. I just saw you.
Oh, I'm
Okay,
sorry.
good. No, it's good.
So I wrote them a letter, I guess is what happened, and said, I haven't heard from you, and what's the deal? However I worded it. Well, they wrote back and said they didn't have my name on the list. What was the deal? Because naturally I hadn't reapplied or anything. I didn't think you had to.
Yeah, I'll see you
Crazy, right?
So what did you do?
So my boyfriend at that time, his father was a friend of the president of Stanford, Ray Lyman Wilbur it was. Anyway, he called him up and said, it told him the whole story, and how he said, "No, this is a person that you'll really want to have." And blah, blah. I mean,
Wow.
he really built me up, I guess, and so they let me in. However, because grandmother hadn't allowed me to go to Stanford, then I went back to JC, and I decided to just take a few classes, but stupidly I took 3 classes that were college credit. I took paleontology, French, and what was the third one? Anyway, so when I went to Stanford, I couldn't go in as a freshman because I had these 3. I had these 3 courses. So it was all fouled up. Yeah. So I had to go in as a sophomore. However, I only had 3 credits, on my freshman year.
Right.
So the 3 years at Stanford, I was constantly trying to make up these other credits, and I couldn't live at the freshman dorm.
Oh, 'cause you already.
So I never really was a freshman with my class that I graduated with. It was a very fouled up thing. It was too bad. It was really stupid. I don't know who to blame, whether it was, I guess I only have myself to blame, but I'm only 16. I was sort of stupid, didn't know the ways of the world.
Yeah.
But my counselor at JC, I would think that he would have
said something.
done something, yeah. I don't know.
So did you have many boyfriends when you were young? You just mentioned that. Was this a steady boyfriend for a while?
Well, this boyfriend, this boyfriend, whose name was Jack Carruthers, he was my second boyfriend.
Okay.
I had a boyfriend who went to Caltech before, and when I often think back and I think, now wait a minute, how did all that work? Because I went with him about 2 years. I must have been 14 when I started going out with him. Mm-hmm. And here he was a college guy.
Right.
I mean, why was he interested in a 14-year-old girl? I don't know. His name was Marcus Hall. He was really a nice guy, and he lived in Pasadena. And he lived with his mother, and I remember his mother was really nice. And I went to the college dances and all this stuff, 14. I mean, that was amazing. I mean, it was amazing. But anyway, then this Jack Carruthers, he was a friend of my brother's. I forget how they met, but anyway, he was the big love of my life. Marcus Hall and I, we went out and we were boyfriend and girlfriend, but I never was that excited about him.
Right.
But Jack Carruthers, wow, he was the big flame of my life.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, I only went with him that summer.
Okay.
No, wait a minute. How did that work? Because his family was wealthy. They lived in Pasadena. They lived in a neat house. I really loved their house. And he went to school back east to Phillips Academy. Mm. And he was about my age, but anyway, I'm trying to figure out how that worked, because I went with him that year. When I was 17, I guess, when I thought I was going to Stanford, as a freshman. And then he stayed home that year. I don't know why. I think he went to school at Princeton, and I can't remember what stage in his life that was. But why he stayed home, and he worked for Lockheed, I remember. But anyway, that was a big thing in my life, because when I went off to school, we were really, we were in love. It was hot and heavy. Then I came home for Christmas time, and he gave a party at his house. Mm-hmm. And I remember he hardly ever danced. He hardly danced with me at all, and I was so hurt. Anyway, he dumped me. It was a big blow to me.
Yeah.
And my good friend Muriel, I don't know if you ever met Muriel. She's still alive. She lives down in Palm Springs. Huh. She said that because they were good friends. Anyway, it was his mother who decided that I wasn't high society enough for her son. So she tried to talk. I don't know how true that was, but anyway. But it was interesting, because all through the years after that, for several years, I kept hearing from him every once in a while. Right. And
just
prolonging the agony. Oh, it was awful. It was something awful. But anyway, so those are my two big big boyfriends.
And how
I've
did
had.
you meet Fatih?
Well, I met him at Stanford,
Okay.
actually in my senior year. I was in the Chi Omega sorority, and he was in the Phi Psi fraternity, and they were sort of paired up. How they did it at Stanford, maybe they do it at most colleges. Often a fraternity and sorority will kind of get paired up and
Right.
do things together and stuff. So anyway, they had a big affair, and all my sorority sisters and his fraternity brothers had decided among themselves that we would be a good combination. So they paired us up at this dinner, and I remember we went out, a group of us went out to a movie after the dinner, and when I came home that night, I told my friends, I said, that's the guy I'm going to marry. So
There you go.
that was the way, and that was actually 6 weeks before we graduated
Oh, wow.
that I met him.
Okay.
So that was
Did-
the story about that.
Did he have any role in you enlisting in the service, or why
No.
did you enlist in the? And talk about your role in the.
I think that when I got out of Stanford, I went to work for CalPac, California Packing Corporation, that does Del Monte Foods.
Mm-hmm.
Things still working, and it was. And this is interesting. This is another sort of a talk about missed opportunities, like you're familiar with.
Right.
Yeah. Anyway, they at colleges then, and I'm sure they do this now, businesses would come to the college and looking for students who they might want to get into their businesses. And I remember IBM came, and they had this seminar thing, a workshop or whatever it was, anyway, looking for talent. And I went to one, or I remember going to one, and maybe it was more, where they talked about IBM, I guess, and what their plans were and all that kind of stuff. And it really didn't interest me. It wasn't my cup of tea, but wow, if I had gotten in on the beginning of IBM,
Oh my God.
that would have been incredible.
Yeah.
But it wasn't. I was into political science. I was going to change the world. That's what I was going to make the world a better place. Actually, I was president of the International Relations Society there, and I had big hopes.
Change the world to make it more peaceful, or what? were your
Yeah,
ambitions?
more
Just
peaceful. Yeah.
Okay.
Anyway, I didn't. I must have still had connection with IBM because the job I got after I got out of college was at CalPac, but I was a key punch operator, their lowest
Right.
form of. I mean, certainly not up in the
Right.
bigwig part of it. And oh my gosh, I hated that job. I'll never forget the first day I was there. All we did was noisy. These machines were noisy. They weren't like a typewriter. They were like a big clanging thing that clanged punched holes in these cards. Oh my gosh! And I remember I think the morning break, where all the women went to the bathroom and there was smoking and stuff, and I'd see some of these older women and I'd say, "How long have you been here?" 25 years. Of course, I don't think they were doing key punch for 25 years, but in my mind I thought, 25 years of doing this? I don't know if I could stand this. Anyway, I did stand it for 2 weeks. It was just awful. I mean, I guess your first job out of school is such a different life than going to college, where you're kind of on your own and you sort of have free time. You can do this and that. And then all of a sudden you're stuck in a little place to do something, the same thing. Oh, God.
You get built up thinking you can change the world and doing all these amazing things,
Well,
and then you go down to
Yeah.
key punch.
So anyway, I did have the gumption to go and tell the people at, the hiring people or whatever, that I said, I don't think that this is for me. Anyway, so they transferred me to another department at CalPac, and I actually I hadn't been trained as a secretary, so I couldn't be called a secretary. I was sort of a receptionist in this man's office, and helped him with filing, and I did a little typing and all, and it was much nicer. And then after a while, I also, on my own, I guess, I don't remember how that started, but I started a little employee newsletter among the employees at CalPac, and that was sort of fun. I loved doing that. See, I was still into my journalism state. I always thought that I was going to be a writer. That was my big deal thing. But
Did you have any jobs at Stanford Any?
Yeah, I did. I had what they called the NRA, National Recovery Act, which was a government thing that paid for jobs for kids, I guess. I worked at the Alumni Association, just doing menial stuff like filing or whatever. But it happened that the head of the Alumni Association at that time was Boone Hamilton, who was a member of this team that I had been a big deal. He got the big. I remember telling you about. He got the biggest kick out of that we had. That I showed him pictures, because we had pictures of all of us. I showed him poems that I'd written to Monk Mostrip. Of course, Monk Mostrip at that point was an alcoholic and he'd gone completely, I think, down the tubes. But anyway, that I think, and we had to work, I think, 10 hours a week or something.
It's not that bad.
Not very long at all. But
what a kick, though, to get to work with
that was fun.
Hero.
Yeah, it was. That was fun.
So how did the waves come about?
Well. Let's see. The war. Well, I'm trying to think back. The war started in December of 1941. We graduated in June of 41.
Okay.
And I joined the Navy about a year later, January, I think, of 43. Was that the way it was? I'm trying to remember how this exactly went. But anyway, it wasn't right away. But I think it was part of your patriotic duty. They needed people. They were trying to recruit people to go in, and particularly officer material, college people. And so that sort of intrigued me. I didn't have any reason not to. I mean, I wasn't doing anything huge in this CalPac. So I had a good time in San Francisco, though, before I joined the Navy. 5 of us lived in an apartment, and we had we rotated the beds. There was one bedroom, if I remember, a double bed. There was one pull-down bed in maybe what was the dining room, and that was a double bed, and then there was a couch in the living room. That's the way we slept. So we'd rotate, moving around between these beds, and we used to kid ourselves. We had 110 ways to cook hamburger, and we had a good time, though. We had a great time. Anyway, so that's what I did. I decided that I needed to do my patriotic duty.
Right. And what were the waves? How would you?
Well, what the word stands for is women. See if I can remember now. Women Associated Volunteer Emergency Service. Is that what it called? Anyway, something like that.
I'll look it up.
And I joined up in San Francisco, and I was nervous about my eyes, and my eyes were never great. I had to wear glasses. And I was afraid maybe they wouldn't admit me, because we had to go back to Smith College for officer training. It was in the middle of winter. I guess it was the winter of 43. It had to be. And no, because I was in New York for 3 years. I don't know how this worked.
Yeah.
Anyway, so all the way back on the train, I ate carrots the whole time, and I think my skin was yellow by the time I got back there. But they passed me. I think they were anxious to get people.
Right.
I didn't have to. Although I didn't have to pass the stringent tests that men did in the actual service. Although they tried to make it so that everything was, they were just as strict with the women.
Right.
So that was a great time. I was back at Smith for 3 months. We were called the 90-Day Wonders. Not just the women, but the men also were going through the same thing.
Okay.
They could become officers in 3 months. It was in the middle of winter. I remember one time it was so cold and so snowy, and here I was, a California girl by this time, even though I had lived in the East a while. But the commander of the place wouldn't let us march, because we'd get up, we'd have to muster at 6 in the morning, I guess it was, in the cold, standing there, just like the men did,
right,
and march to breakfast at this Smith Tavern, this wonderful place in New Hampshire. It was incredible, and we lived in dorms at Smith College. That was neat. I loved that.
But what were your
anyway
duties in the What were your jobs? And you mentioned some perks before.
I was assigned to the communication part, and and I gave as my address, instead of California, I gave as my address as New York, because my dad was living in New York then. He had remarried to Aunt Evelyn. You probably never met Aunt Evelyn. Anyway, that was my stepmother. She was a neat lady. And he moved into her home. She had a nice home in Scarsdale and was actually running a nursery school there. And so I don't know really why I did give that. But anyway, so I was sent to New York City, which was kind of a neat duty. I was there for 3 years. And I was in communications, which meant sending of messages, coding and decoding of messages, and also the delivery of secret messages. All secret messages had to be handled by officers. So we actually did a lot of just plain delivery. Take this message and take it to a command, one of the officers.
Did you read the messages, or, I mean, I guess if you're decoding them. And
yeah.
So were there any, I mean, I guess it's all in military speak, but there wasn't.
Well, actually, we were there during when they were preparing for D-Day.
Right.
In Normandy and all that. So nobody was really saying that there was going to be an invasion, when it was going to be, but you could tell by all the speeding up of all the activity and that something was going to happen.
Wow.
It was an interesting time to be there, although we worked around the clock, just like they did on shipboard, which was stupid, because there wasn't any reason for us to do that. We'd work a week from 9 to 5, and then a week from 5 to 9, and then a week from 9 to in the morning, or to midnight, or whatever it was. But anyway, it was sort of fun, because it meant that if we worked in the nighttime, we'd play in the daytime. We worked in the daytime, we'd play in the nighttime. We worked in the early evening, we'd play before and after. I mean, it was like crazy. It was a wonderful time to be in New York City, and being in the military. You got all the benefits of any of the other military that come in. We could go to Carnegie Hall anytime we want.
Wow.
We'd get half price tickets to anything, and
that is neat.
so it was a pretty exciting time to live there.
And you did well.
I lived in Greenwich Village for a while. I had an apartment with a friend that I'm still in touch with, and we had a great time.
And you did very well in the service. Didn't you get awards or something like that? No? Promotions? No?
We got regular promotions. When I got out, I was a Lieutenant JG, which wasn't that great. But if I had stayed just a little bit longer, it's only by length of time or something.
Okay.
I would have been a full lieutenant, but I ended up as a JG. And then if you probably know that Fatih was in the Marines, and he was in the Pacific in the war. Okay. So I decided that I wanted to go out to California and change my job. So I got somebody who was in San Francisco in the 12th Naval District stationed on Treasure Island to trade with me in New York City. That's the way we had to work it.
Okay.
And so then I got transferred out there, and so I was there when he came home, and
wow.
And because then we planned to get married on Treasure Island.
Right.
And I had a dress borrowed from a Navy friend of mine.
And that was a big deal that you were allowed to wear a dress.
Yeah, it was.
And who walked you down the aisle? And how did you request to get the dress?
My commanding officer, who was actually a pretty big war hero, Mike Moran. He was on a cruiser that was a big deal in the Navy and stuff. So, What are you going to do?
Can I listen?
Oh, well, I guess. I guess. Anyway, he gave me away, and he said that that was one of the nicest things that he got to do in the wartime, which was here's this big hero that's been and all kinds of things. That's what he said. But anyway, and it was kind of fun. The last time we were up in the Bay Area, and we stayed with Norman. We went, and he drove us around Treasure Island, which is the first time I've been back since I left there. Of course, it looked way different, and I couldn't tell exactly where I'd lived, because I lived in the WOQ, the women's officers' quarters there, and where I worked, I don't know where that building was, but the church was still there, and the officers' club where we had the reception afterwards, and that was there. But that was kind of fun.
Yeah. How did you choose Treasure Island? Was it just because?
Because I could get this person
Okay.
that would trade with me.
I mean,
I wanted to be in San Francisco.
Okay. I mean, but to actually be married on Treasure Island,
Oh.
in a chapel or.
Yeah, we got married in the chapel there, but just because I was stationed
Okay.
there, that was sort of my home,
Yeah.
you know.
How did he?
And the only people that were at the wedding were wave people. It was strange. Yeah, and Fati's family came up, but my
Okay.
family wasn't there.
Yeah. That's interesting. Was that kind of sad for you?
No, I don't know.
You've been out.
I'm so long on my own. It
Yeah.
wasn't any big deal. Actually, Dad and Evelyn had planned to come out, and then I forget how this worked. Whether he got home sooner than he thought he was going to, and they couldn't make arrangements to
Right.
drive out or something. Anyway, they weren't there.
How did Fati propose?
I don't. Maybe he shouldn't be here for all this, but I don't think he ever actually proposed. I think I said something like, "Are we ever going to get married?" or whatever.
What a romantic.
Yeah.
Maybe you shouldn't be here. Okay, so you were going to say what?
Okay, I was just going to add that about this proposal, and I said, "Well, are we ever going to get married?" And Danny said, "Well, I guess we'd have pretty good-looking children." That was.
Turns out he was right.
Yeah.
That is pretty funny. Okay, so it was a beautiful sunny day, and and do you remember getting a sinking feeling in your stomach when you heard about the Pearl Harbor, or was it just kind of like you were expecting the?
I've forgotten, but it must have been, must have been a shock, yeah.
Yeah, I would imagine. And then when we ended up dropping the bomb, do you remember having any feelings one way or the other about that? Obviously it was.
Wow. I think I wasn't aware of its actual impact that it would have on the people there, how many people it would kill, and what devastation it would do. I think at that point the big issue was winning the war and
Right.
getting this thing over with, and so that was a big deal. That was
And it did.
unfortunately.
Yeah. So, what do you remember? Speaking of the war ending, do you remember with all? You see all these papers and the classic kiss and all that stuff. Was it?
I think I actually was on duty working there. I was in communications again, and
Right.
we still had to work, around the clock hours and stuff. And I think I was on duty. I don't remember. I didn't go into the city or anything or any big deal.
Cheering
I think we whooped it up our own way, but
Right.
no huge deal.
And he came back.
And we were still in the service, still had work to do. The next day we had to
Wow.
go to work the same way.
Yeah, that's
It
true.
didn't change anything.
Yeah, I guess then that would take a little bit of the
Yeah.
excitement away. Let's see, what else did they talk about here? Oh, the whole Rosie the Riveter. Had they talked about how the war sort of empowered women? Did you feel one way or the other?
Well-
some women looked down upon the people that would, try to do a man's job, or
Well, see, we were actually doing a man's job. That's what when I went to New York, I was one of the early. I was, I forget whether I was in the second group of waves, but anyway, we were early enough so that we actually shook the hand of the man that we were replacing, so he could go overseas. So we knew we were doing.
right.
Uh,
Was that kind of empowering to you, or?
Well,
You knew.
it was neat. It was the reason we joined.
Right.
That was the whole thing. Join the wave and do a job so we can send a man
Yeah.
to sea and do fight the war. That was the whole program.
Yeah.
So
Different world. Let's see here. We could take a. Actually, I was going to ask you about Evelyn. When did your dad marry Evelyn? How old were you?
trying to remember exactly. I think it maybe was when I was 15.
Do you remember feeling like the classic, oh, she's not going to replace
Well,
me?
understand, when I was 10, I came out to visit my grandmother and
Right.
stayed.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't even see our dad. You know, he didn't come out, and we didn't go back to New York. We were just there.
Mm-hmm.
He was in New York, and he married her. We didn't know her, didn't meet her.
Wow.
So, you know, there was...
Yeah.
I don't remember there being any resentment, or no, I don't.
Because
No.
at that point, it was kind of like it wasn't affecting you. It wouldn't be like...
Yeah, just sort of. I don't remember. I must have had a reaction, but I don't really remember what the reaction was.
Yeah.
You know?
Okay.
I think that Dad probably wrote us or talked on the telephone or something and said, you know, that I met this woman I love, and I'm sure you'll love her too, and never replace your mother, and all those things, you know.
Okay.
But we all actually liked her. She was a neat person.
Yeah. That's good.
So
I think you're pretty easy to get along with. Let's see here. What was going through your mind when your first child was born, Norm?
what was going through my mind when he was born? I remember it was pretty painful. I remember too that people would say, the nurses or whoever would say, you know, you're not going to remember any of this, you know, in a little while. But the truth of it is, here I am 83, and however long that was, I can remember that feeling. That was just horrible. And I remember I must have been flapping my arms and kicking, because my arms were black and blue after.
Gosh.
So it was something. But
Well, that was the physical. Do you remember? I mean,
The physical.
obviously, it's hard to put into words. I can say that now. It's hard to put into words. Holding the baby after
Yeah.
it's born, but
oh gosh, I don't know. This is terrible, but I can't remember any. I'm sure I was.
yeah.
You know, it was a big event that you sit around and wait for 9 months to have happen. So, and he was a healthy boy, and
Were
so-
you one of those girls who, growing up, you always wanted to have 5 kids and really were looking forward to the mother role?
well, I always thought I wanted to have a big family. I thought I wanted to have 4 kids.
Okay.
But then I think after the twins were born, I decided that was enough.
Yeah. Okay. So talk about this unexpected, you know, they had Carol, and then, because I can't get my head around this. You have Carol, and then the doctor says, oh, there's one more in there?
That's-
That must have been the...
That's the way it appeared to me anyway. And I do remember that after Carol was born, and they took the baby away and washed her or whatever they do, and I felt like I was all alone in there. And that I remember feeling very like abandoned almost. You know, here I've just had a baby and nobody's around. There probably were nurses around doing things, but I wasn't aware of this.
Right.
But I remember it, and it probably wasn't as long as it seemed, but it seemed like I was abandoned on this table for a long time. Where is my baby? And here I am. I mean, I'm the mother. I gave birth. What's happening here?
Right.
So anyway, the doctor did come back and I guess started to sew me up, and this is the way I remember it, that he actually said, whoops, there's somebody else in there. So
How did they not know that before? Just, I mean, I guess...
well, they just didn't have the sophisticated techniques that they have now. But and when they listened to heartbeats, they must have heard a simultaneous heartbeat. So
Right.
they only heard one all the time. And there was no suspicion that I hadn't gotten that big. I think I gained maybe 5 more pounds than with Norman. But
Right.
so
So that just
Anyway.
must have been shocking.
it was sort of a shock.
So talk about...
Well, not only that, but we had ordered a special crib for the second baby from a friend of ours who had this box, like a Skinner box, B.F. Skinner box, where the
Right.
baby lay on a lucite mattress in a big box, and it was all controlled electrically, and all this stuff was supposed to be neat. Well, we ordered one of those, and that was what I said when Karen was born. Oh my goodness! We'll put her back. We only have one bed, and all. I mean, it was horrible.
Oh my gosh. Let's see here. Oh, I have some some general decade questions. What did you think about TV when it debuted at the World Fair? Do you remember thinking TV going from radio to this amazing?
I don't remember. I don't know if I was at the World's Fair that they actually.
Or just
I may have been.
hearing about it in the
Do you remember which World Fair it was? Because
I don't know.
I don't know.
just wrote down World Fair.
But I just know that we did get a TV when our kids were little, and I don't even remember the size of it. But of course, it probably was black and white. And I know TV was kind of a big part. It was exciting to have, and we were like one of the, not the first, but we were among the first to have TV, I guess, on our block, so it was a big deal.
Wow.
And remember the kids liked to watch it, and I know that in the afternoon, late afternoon, what I'd do is I'd sit the kids down in front of the TV and I'd put a big platter of cut up vegetables, raw vegetables, and there'd be things like oh gosh, I can't even remember some of the programs,
The
but
Mickey Mouse Club and those types of things, or was that
Mickey Mouse Club wasn't rung the first, but
Okay.
whatever they were.
Yeah.
I can't right now think of what the programs were. But anyway, they sit there, mesmerized, just eating vegetables, and I'm sitting there thinking, yay!
It's quiet.
And then I remember one time Fatih came home, and the kids were, it's hypnotic, this TV, to kids. And they're sitting there like they're with their eyes glued, and Fatih comes in the door and says hi or something, and they didn't pay any attention to him. They're watching the TV, and he must have been tired or something, but it just hit him. So he just started to haul off the TV to take it out the front door. Oh my gosh, I had to talk him out of that. That was something. I'll never forget that.
Because he didn't get his greeting.
Well, he just thought it was awful that they'd totally ignore him when he walked in the door.
That is pretty awful.
Yeah.
I have to agree. In some way. What about space exploration? Do you remember
The what?
space exploration, or the man on the moon and all that?
Well, getting back to TV, one of
okay.
the interesting things about in our family was that Norman was always an early riser,
Mm-hmm.
and in the house that we lived in then, there was a central hallway, and there was a floor heater that you could see through, because the heat came out into the hall and into the living room.
Mm-hmm.
So he would. I don't know. Wait a minute. This is not true. No, this is what would happen at night when he couldn't go to sleep at night, and we were still up watching television. He'd lie in the hall and watch the television through the through the heater. But then in the morning he'd get up and he'd turn on Panorama Pacific before anyone else was up, and this was really a great show. It was like a news show and an interview show. He learned more stuff on that. He would come up with facts, and it was really, really incredible.
That is interesting.
But then I remember after a while he also got his sisters to get into the habit of looking through the screen, through the heater at the screen. Why we didn't move the TV so that they couldn't be viewed, I don't know. But anyway.
So speaking of them being kids, so talk about the haunted houses because wasn't that one of the big things you used to do at the Hill House? The haunted houses that you would put on?
Oh, yeah. It started out in our Hillsdale house where we lived when the kids were little, and we just have little concession games on the front porch for the neighborhood kids, and they loved that, like throwing bean bags in the pumpkin, or I don't know what all else we had, but that was fun. But yeah, on the Hill Street house we did a couple of years. We had, and it was very popular. We had it was a 2-story house, and you'd enter on the top and go down. And the kids would line up in the neighborhood to see this. It was incredible. We'd dress up the water bottle. Mm-hmm. That would be greeting them at the door, right. And then we'd blindfold them after that, and we'd take them through the kitchen where there'd be spaghetti hanging and cobwebs and wet rags and stuff, and then they'd have to go. There was a door to go downstairs, and we'd knock on the door 3 times, and then someone on the other side would knock 3 times, and they'd open the door, and then someone would be there with a wet glove stuffed with wet bran that felt slimy, and so the kids would grab a hold of this hand, and go all the way down the stairs, and Oh my! It was fun. It was a riot. I forget all that. What else we had? But they had to put their hands in things like peeled grapes, and we told them that they were the eyes of all this stuff. I mean, even older kids would come there and just be quivering, going down, but loving it. They'd go out and come, stand in line again, and go through it again. It was really fun.
Tell them about Ray.
Huh?
Tell them about Ray. Margulies.
Yeah. My brother-in-law once came to visit us at Halloween time, so we had a big storage room in that house, and so we had him lie down like in a coffin, and he'd rise up. I mean, we had more stuff than you can imagine. It was really fun.
Yeah, that sounds like fun.
Wish we'd had you though. We could have been more creative with
I
stuff.
don't know. That sounds pretty good. So how did and this I couldn't believe it, but when I talked to you, I forgot to ask this whole question since it's such a big part of our family. Talk about, even though this wasn't at the Hill Street house, I don't think, but just Marilyn and her. How did that all come about?
Well, Marilyn and Karen and Carol were all three on the pep squad when Marilyn was a year older than the girls, so they were on, I don't know if they were on for several years. Anyway, they were all in the pep squad together, and they were good friends. Mm-hmm. And so the fall of Marilyn's senior year, her mother died. Her father had died a few years before. So she moved in with a friend of hers, but it didn't work out. And I remember Karen came home from some event or something and said that it wasn't working out with Marilyn to live with whoever this girl was. And could she live with us? And so, we said, sure, that would be fine, because we had room downstairs and everything. And Norma was off in college, okay. And so we thought it would be fine to help her out, Actually, they had lived on Hillsdale. We had known them for a long time. They had lived on Hillsdale, the street where we lived when the kids were born, and lived until Norman was in the 5th grade, I guess. But anyway, they lived up the street. We didn't know them really well. In fact, that one of the jokes is that Marilyn's mother didn't like Marilyn to play with us because of their crazy mother. Because we always were doing a few weird things. But anyway, so she came in to live with us, and everyone thought it would just be for that year, She did have an aunt and uncle that lived close by, I think in San Fernando Valley, and she had another aunt that lived in Morningside or something. But it just sort of went on, and it worked out, and she just kind of stayed there. So I think I don't know if it was that Christmas, maybe it was. We gave her a key to the house, and a big letter saying you were part of the family, and it just sort of evolved, you know.
Right.
And then she was a senior, and then she went to college. I think we were pretty instrumental in getting her to be sure to go to college, and encouraging her to stay in the theater, because her family, her aunts and uncles, thought that was awful. They didn't want her to be in the theater, but we were encouraging her. So she liked what she was getting from us. Right. So it just worked out.
Yeah, so neat. She's a part of the family.
You're part of the family.
Okay, let's see here. So space exploration, do you remember any early thoughts on the way we could put a person on the moon, or any?
I remember watching it on TV and being interested.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. What about, where were you when JFK was shot?
That, I was in the car as well. I remember I was right up here at Slauson and La Brea. I think I was actually headed to go to the beauty parlor to get a permanent. That's in the days when I was getting permanents. That's exactly where I was when it happened.
And was that shocking? Did you like JFK?
Well, I at that time was a Republican. I wasn't a big admirer of him, but still, it's a traumatic thing to have your president assassinated. You know, so it was a big deal.
Absolutely. What were your feelings on Vietnam, and then particularly with Norm?
Well, Norm, of course, was in college when Vietnam when Vietnam started, and he was a senior in college. I think it was during his senior year when they instituted the draft, and he was number 20. That was his number. So while he was in school, he was exempt, but when he got out, he would be, of course, one of the first called, being number 20. So. It was a big deal, and I think I was quite anti-war then. Maybe not as much as I am now about the Iraq thing, but I think I was very, what are we doing over there fighting the, blah blah blah.
Right.
That same feeling. Why they're not attacking us? What's the deal?
Is that what the difference was when in World War II you were talking about doing your patriotic duty? Was that because we were attacked, or? I mean, what's the
I think so. Yeah. That was
going over and nosing around.
Yeah. But anyway, so Norman then after he got out, I've forgotten if it was exactly right after he graduated from college that he joined Vista. I think it did because I think he had to do something. Vista was Volunteers in Service to America, which was kind of like. Peace Corps, but it was the in America thing. So he joined that, and for a year, and then he joined it again, and actually, and then after that, after 2 years, he decided that this was kind of silly. He can't keep on doing this, and so he joined the service and went to officer school and stuff. But he never had to go to Vietnam. So I mean. We were very lucky in that way, actually. But
no kidding. So talk about the, health plays such a huge role in your life now. But you started out, you smoked when you were younger. Do you remember?
Well, I started smoking, I remember, in my senior year in college, or was it my junior year? Wow, I can't remember exactly. But I remember sitting in the room with my roommates. I think my roommates, one of them smoked and one of them didn't, and I decided that I'd try one. And I remember sitting on the bed there, smoking it, and I just got dizzy as heck and sick, and I mean, why would anybody with that reaction? Why would you take the second one?
Right.
Who knows? But that's when I started, and I got into it, and I smoked, I guess, for what was it, about 16 years or something. Let's see. Well. I quit in 1957. So, but I remember trying to quit a couple of times, and I couldn't do it until one day when I was sitting outside on our back patio, and I was pool sitting. The kids were swimming with their friends, and I was reading health magazines because I was totally into health, smoking this cigarette. And I'm sure this thought had come to me before, but this time it hit right. He said, what in the world, how hypocritical are you, if you're talking health and reading health and smoking? So I put out the cigarette, and I remember I still had some cigarettes left in the pack, and I've just never smoked a cigarette since then. And it was interesting because that night there was going to be a party, a victory party for a friend of ours, Birch Donahue, who'd gotten elected judge. So I thought, well, this is going to be good. Everyone will be smoking and drinking. This will be really hard. But for some reason, once you made up your mind, it just worked. So that was a story about that. And I was happy about that.
So you already had the health magazine. What got you into nutrition? Were you into nutrition as a child? Did that have a big role? Well,
as a matter of fact, my father. This is the way the story goes. One time when I was little, and we lived, I guess at that point, in Sound Beach, Connecticut, so I had to be maybe around 6 or 7. This, and I don't remember it, I'm just told this, is that he went to a lecture on health and nutrition, and he came home and threw out all the white flour and white sugar, and he became a health nut from then on. And I remember we did have pretty healthy meals, and we didn't have candy and all that stuff, except my mother gave us as treats once in a while a candy bar that was called Tasty Yeast. I remember it was chocolate covered, and whether it was carob covered, I don't know, and it was had yeast in it, and that was a big deal. So anyway, So I guess we were raised from then on with
Right.
quite healthy, because he was sort of apt to be fanatic when he did something, he'd do it all the way, So then I kind of got out of that as I grew up. But then having kids, I guess I got into thinking about it again. Well, no, I not right away. I'll have to take that back. I also went to a lecture on health with a friend of mine. I don't remember who it was that gave it, and it just hit me. I mean, this is terrible. Of course, this is the way you should eat. Everything should be natural and the best quality and all whole grains and all this stuff. So I came home and I didn't throw stuff out like my dad did, but I think that I got into it more. And I mean, like we had raw milk and all that kind of stuff. And gosh, I don't remember that we had a vegetable garden, though. That was one crazy thing. Why didn't we do that? I don't know. I don't know.
And how did sorry, were you going to keep... you have more?
I'm afraid I wasn't 100%. I can remember lots of times things that we because I remember one thing, we'd have donuts when we'd go out to Norman's baseball games, and if his team would win, this is when he was a little kid in the little leagues, if his team would win, we'd go and have donuts as a treat.
And that was at Randy's Donuts, isn't it?
Yeah, right, the big donut.
My mom's pointed that out.
Yeah.
So how did so talk about the nutritional task force, did you start that, or what was your...
Well, I was on the grand jury for L.A. County in 1981, I guess it was, or 80 to 81. And that's you're on that for a year in L.A. And so one of the things was happening around January of that year was they had a 3-day conference. The Board of Supervisors did have a 3-day conference on the causes of violence and violent behavior, and people came from all over, and I decided I wanted to go to that as a grand jury member. So I went to all 3 conferences, and there were a lot of people talking about nutrition and how in other places institutions would try just having the prisoners and all eat healthy food, and how it changed their behavior and all that. So I thought that was kind of neat. Well, then so the board got interested in that too, particularly Michael Antonovich, who was a supervisor then and still is, and so he convinced the board to have to make a 3-month trial period in the probation facilities with the juveniles, and try eliminating chocolate and whole grain bread and sodas and candy and all the else stuff. Like a 9-point thing of what they did. Well, they decided after 3 months that they couldn't tell really. It was too short a time to really tell any significant difference, but the health department decided that it was a good idea anyway. Let's just keep on with this. So then they appointed a task force called the Task Force on Nutrition and Behavior that was supposed to study this and what other people had done and other institutions had done. All anyway, so I convinced Supervisor Antonovich to appoint me because I was interested in nutrition, and at that time I didn't have any nutrition degree or anything, but so he appointed me. So I was one of the first appointees to this thing, and it was a very influential bunch of people that were on it. It was really neat. And as a matter of fact, I'm the only one left that was on the original task force. So that's been a long time. And I'm not sure that we've accomplished that much, but it's very hard to change people and how they eat, and institutions, the cooks that cook and the people that eat it. I mean, you just make little tiny inroads, or get them to be aware of it, or...
Have you made any accomplishments that you could actually point to?
Oh gosh, I wish I could say.
Didn't you start?
I think more awareness of it, and just sort of monitoring it. I mean, they still had this 10-point thing that they were supposed to do in the probation department. So we were supposed to monitor to see that they were doing that. And of course, as the years went by, they stopped doing it, and we'd keep chugging away at them. One of the things I think that we have done is to try to get vegetable gardens in the probation department. That's one thing. We're still working on that. But there are, actually, Supervisor Antonovich gave money to have 3 camps try 3 gardens. So each, so I think that's probably our biggest achievement that we've made.
Oh, that's good. Let's see here. What's the key to successful parenting?
Oh, wow.
And then also, what's the key to
You're assuming that we did successful parenting, I guess. I think we did. We had 3 pretty neat kids. Like Danny used to say, if we can keep him out of jail, that's all he was hoping for. But so I guess we were successful. I don't know. Let's see. I of course became very interested in Montessori and Montessori's philosophy, and I kind of raised my kids with that philosophy without even knowing that there was a philosophy like that. To sort of, I don't know, respect for the kids and that for their individuality, and I guess that would be maybe the cornerstone of it.
No, that's good. What's the key to a successful marriage?
I don't know. I'm not sure I'm the one to answer that.
Okay. Let's see here. What are your thoughts on September 11th? These are all kind of scattered.
September 11th. Well, it was pretty devastating. Gosh, I remember, and I don't watch much television, but I was glued to the television for that whole day. It was pretty awful.
Mm-hmm. Let's see. Looking back at your life up to this point, would you change anything?
Oh.
That's a hard question.
That is.
Some of it's like if you don't have control over it.
Right.
What's your philosophy on life? Or you can answer that question if you think about it.
My philosophy?
Philosophy on life. Like, do you have a grand life philosophy?
Well, I'm not sure that I follow it every day, but I guess my philosophy would be to enjoy the moment, enjoy the day where you are. And I remember Marilyn gave me a T-shirt once that said, "Bloom where you're planted," which I think is a very good philosophy. You know, make the best of what you have and live from day to day.
Yeah, oh, that's good. Final question. If you could talk to your descendant born 200 years from now, what would you say?
200 years hence?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, what would I say?
Or 100 years,
You
or
think?
300 years?
Or Daniel?
Or well, you can
Oh, you know, I don't know. I don't know if I'm one to tell people what they should do or whether they should do things differently. If they, and life becomes different. I mean, 200 years from now, life is going to be way different. How can I say what I would? I guess I would, if I were asked for this, I would probably say. I do believe that what one eats is very important about how the kind of life you live and how you feel about life and all that. How you know how your whole approach to life. And I think that what you eat is how you determine what's the best thing to eat is to try to eat the top quality in whatever you eat. I don't think you should have any special kind of diet. You'd eat, if you're going to eat bread, have it be the best whole grain bread, not refined stuff. And if you're going to eat, you know, just the top quality, whatever.
Right.
Eat the top quality meat, top quality eggs.
Yeah.
If you're going to drink milk, drink the best, raw, organic, you know, unpasteurized.
Yeah. That's good. Can't really.
That's not very profound, but
No, but you're right. 200 years from now, who knows? Maybe that will help them. If they're
maybe.
still speaking English.
Yes, right. And if that's true, if they're still speaking English, or if they're not just having all genetically modified food.
Yeah, right. Or if it's just you just pick one healthy person and clone them over and over again. All right. Well, I think
That's it.
those are my questions. Unless you had anything else to add.
No, I
Actually,
don't.
if you wouldn't mind
I don't
telling
think so. I'll probably think of something.
Well, we'll get
10
to it.
minutes, but.
Could you say, because I'm not sure if the thing was rolling, if the
Oh.
break was at the beginning, just that first part about the washing the hands with champagne, just because I think that was a cute story.
Oh.
Just that,
Well,
just that little portion.
I don't know. I wish I could make it into a cuter story. I just heard that they washed. My family in Europe did wash their hands in champagne. I don't know how often, whether it was only once or was because particularly where they were the water was dirty or what. But anyway, the fact that you could wash your hands in champagne was pretty. And I don't think they were that filthy rich that it sounds like. But
Right.
anyway,
It's a good story, nonetheless.
yeah.
All right. I think I'm good. If you're good, are you good?
I think so.